Welcome back everyone, thank you so much for clicking on the video. Today we are breaking down one of the most powerful druid builds for Season 1. Massive damage and probably one of the tankiest leveling builds in Diablo 4. Among all druid core skills, Landslide is always going to be the top choice because it deals the most initial damage and has the capability to destroy enemies in just one hit. The great thing is this build is set up to be put together from the moment you start Season 1. Over time, as you progress through World Tier 1, 2, and 3, each skill and passive will grow in strength, extending its usefulness into endgame. The best basic skill to use on this build is Storm Strike. With 25% damage reduction, a 50% chance to make your opponents vulnerable, and also a 15% chance to immobilize, Storm Strike offers considerable bonuses for just a basic skill. This skill is used as a utility to increase the effectiveness of your Landslide skill and also to generate spirit. Speaking of the core skill, Landslide is amazing. This skill crushes enemies between two pillars, dealing massive damage, and it's easily the strongest core skill for the druid. If you want to eliminate enemies and bosses fast, you need to use this core skill. Just like with every skill, there's going to be some pros and cons. Some downsides to Landslide is the narrow AoE, delay, and at times it may be a bit challenging to target a specific enemy. The best thing to do is treat this as a melee skill and play it up close whenever you can. The single target damage capabilities of Landslide will be most noticeable against elites and bosses, but you can still destroy multiple enemies with just one cast with the right timing and range. Unlocking the enhanced Landslide modifier will give you the ability to immobilize enemies for 3 seconds after Landslide damages enemies 4 times. This is important because every time you successfully immobilize an enemy, you gain a terramote thanks to the Primal Landslide modifier. With this modifier unlocked, each enemy hit by Landslide consumes a terramote, causing a guaranteed critical strike with 40% extra critical hit damage. Bosses have up to a 10% chance to grant a terramote when hit. Next up, we have Poison Creeper, which is actually one of the deadliest skills on the build and will help you set up massive amounts of damage even against the most formidable foes. Poison Creeper adds both a passive and active component to your build. For the passive, a Poison Creeper periodically emerges from the ground every 7 seconds and applies poisoning damage over 6 seconds. The active, which is what occurs when you activate the skill, summons vines to strangle all enemies in the surrounding area, immobilizing and poisoning them for 3 seconds. Poison Creeper is going to help you keep your terramotes active, which increases the effectiveness and power of Landslide. With enhanced Poison Creeper, immobilize duration is increased by 1 second, and with brutal Poison Creeper, your crit chances increase by 20% against enemies that are strangled by this skill. By now you can already see just how easy it is to stack crits on this build. You almost don't even need any crit chance or crit damage on your stats since your skills provide it for you. The next skill on the build is Hurricane. This skill is great for leveling. It offers breathing room for your character. If you ever feel overwhelmed, it continuously knocks back enemies, dealing damage at the same time. To increase the effectiveness of Hurricane, I recommend unlocking the enhanced Hurricane modifier, which slows down enemies by 25% for 2 seconds. And then you have Savage Hurricane, which is an easy way to increase your survivability since it nerfs the damage enemies deal to you by 20%. The second Wrath skill on this build is Trample. Shapeshift into a werebear, become unstoppable, and charge forward, dealing damage and knocking enemies back. Enemies who are knocked back into terrain take additional damage and are stunned for 3 seconds. That stun is important because every time you stun or immobilize an enemy, you gain a terramote for Landslide, which again provides a guaranteed critical strike with 40% extra critical hit damage for each attack. If you want to increase the power of Trample, it's a good idea to unlock the enhanced Trample modifier, which increases the damage that Trample deals by 150%. Natural Trample is great too since it fortifies you over time, and thanks to some aspects and passives in the skill tree, you'll be able to deal way more damage when you are fortified. For the ultimate skill, your best option is going to be Petrify. This ultimate synergizes so well with every other skill on this build. Encase all nearby enemies in stone, stunning them for 4.18 seconds. You deal 30% increased critical strike damage to enemies affected by Petrify. Against bosses, the critical strike damage bonus is increased to 50% and the duration is increased to 7 seconds. This ultimate stuns enemies, which means you can easily stack terramotes with Landslide. With Petrify active, you're essentially guaranteed a critical hit with every attack, and you also receive over a 100% crit hit damage boost for each attack as well, since Petrify and Primal Landslide will be working hand in hand. The best key passive for this build is Nature's Fury. This key passive is incredibly strong since it basically doubles the effectiveness of every single skill on your build. Casting an Earth skill has a 30% chance to trigger a free Storm skill of the same category. In addition, casting a Storm skill has a 30% chance to trigger a free Earth skill of the same category. This means every time you activate Storm Strike, there's a chance you can also summon Earth Strike. If you activate Landslide, there's a chance to activate Lightning Storm or Tornado. When you activate Hurricane or Trample, there's a chance to summon Boulder. And when you activate your ultimate skill, Petrify, there's a 30% chance to activate Cataclysm. All in all, this build is a CC monster, the damage is insane, and the survivability is top tier. Now that you understand the playstyle for this Druid leveling build, let's take an in-depth look at the skill tree and the skill point allocation. For the basic skill, you only need to invest 1 point into Storm Strike. This skill isn't used for damage, it's used as a utility to gain spirit, apply vulnerable to enemies, and also immobilize them. Enhanced Storm Strike has a 15% chance to immobilize all enemies for 2.6 seconds. And if you remember what I said earlier, immobilized or stunned enemies generate terramotes for Landslide, which increases your overall damage substantially. Fierce Storm Strike has a 50% chance to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. Vulnerable enemies will always take 20% increased damage. Moving into the core and main DPS skill on this build, Landslide. This skill is going to be your main source of damage, so I recommend investing as many points as you possibly can into Landslide. Crush enemies between 2 pillars of earth, dealing insane amounts of damage. With Enhanced Landslide, enemies are immobilized for 3 seconds every time Landslide damages enemies 4 times. This is important because every time you successfully immobilize an enemy, you gain a terramote thanks to the Primal Landslide modifier. With this modifier unlocked, each enemy hit by Landslide consumes a terramote, causing a guaranteed critical strike with 40% extra critical hit damage. Bosses have up to a 10% chance to grant a terramote when hit. There's also 3 extremely beneficial passive skills here that you need to unlock if you want to get the most out of the build. Heart of Wild increases your maximum spirit by 9. Abundance is crucial because your basic skills generate 18% more spirit, and Wild Impulses is also worth grabbing since it increases your DPS. Core skills cost 9% more spirit, but deal 15% increased damage. There's no defensive skills on this build for now because you simply don't need them until you get to World Tier 4. Now for the companion skill, we have Poison Creeper. You only really need 1 point invested in this companion skill for now since it already does so much damage and it sets up some powerful DPS combos. Poison Creeper adds both a passive and active component to your build. For the passive, a Poison Creeper periodically emerges from the ground every 7 seconds and applies poisoning damage over 6 seconds. Now for the active, which is what occurs when you activate the skill, this summons vines to strangle all enemies in the surrounding area, immobilizing and poisoning them for 3 seconds. Poison Creeper is going to help you keep your terramotes active, which increases the effectiveness and power of your core skill. With Enhanced Poison Creeper, Immobilize duration is increased by 1 second, and with Brutal Poison Creeper, your crit chance is increased by 20% against enemies that are strangled by this skill. I also recommend unlocking the Clarity passive skill here below just to help you conserve spirit and be a little bit more efficient in combat. There's 2 Wrath skills on this build, the first one being Hurricane. Now like I mentioned earlier, this skill is great because it offers some breathing room for your character. If you ever feel overwhelmed, it continuously knocks back enemies and it also does damage at the same time. To increase the effectiveness of Hurricane, I recommend unlocking the Enhanced Hurricane modifier, which slows enemies down by 25% for 2 seconds, and Savage Hurricane, which is an easy way to increase your survivability since it nerfs the damage enemies deal to you by 20%. The next Wrath skill is Trample. Shapeshift into a werebear, becoming unstoppable, and charge forward, dealing damage and knocking enemies back. Enemies who are knocked back into terrain take additional damage and are stunned for 3 seconds. Now that stun is important because if you remember, every time we stun or immobilize, we gain a terramote. If you want to increase the power of Trample, it's a good idea to unlock the Enhanced Trample modifier, which increases the damage that Trample deals by 150%. Natural Trample is great too since it fortifies you over time, and thanks to some aspects and passives in the skill tree, you'll be able to deal way more damage when you're fortified. There's 3 passive skills in this section that you should fully rank up as soon as you can. With Crushing Earth, Earth skills deal 15% increased damage to slowed, stunned, immobilize, or knockback enemies. Pretty much every skill on this build will apply at least 2 or 3 of these effects on enemies, meaning that 15% damage buff will always stay active. With Safeguard, critical strikes with Earth skills fortify you for 7% base life, and with Stone Guard, every time you fortify over 50% of your maximum life, your Earth skills deal 12% increased damage. Lots of damage buffs here that you do not want to overlook. For the ultimate skill, your best option is going to be Petrify. This ultimate synergizes so well with every other skill on this build. With this skill, you encase all nearby enemies in stone, stunning them for 4 seconds. You deal 30% increased critical strike damage to enemies that are affected by this ultimate. Against bosses, the critical strike damage bonus is increased to 50% and the duration is increased to 7 seconds. This ultimate stuns enemies, which means you can easily stack terramotes with Landslide. With Petrify active, you're essentially guaranteed a critical hit with every attack, and you also receive over a 100% crit hit damage boost for each attack as well, since Petrify and Primal Landslide will be working hand in hand. With Prime Petrify, Petrify's effect duration is increased by 1 second, and Supreme Petrify, you gain 25% spirit every time you kill an enemy. Defiance, Natural Disaster, and Resonance are extremely powerful passives that you need to unlock, especially if you are using the Nature's Fury key passive skill. With Defiance, nature magic skills deal 12% increased damage to elites. With Natural Disaster, your Earth skills deal 12% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and your Storm skills deal 12% increased damage to enemies that are stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. Resonance works amazing with Nature's Fury. Nature magic skills deal 6% increased damage, triple this bonus if an Earth skill is the next skill cast after a Storm skill, and vice versa. It's also worth grabbing Defensive Posture since it increases the amount of Fortify you gain from all sources by 15%. The best key passive for this build is Nature's Fury, like I mentioned. This key passive is incredibly strong since it basically doubles the effectiveness of every single skill on your build. Casting an Earth skill has a 30% chance to trigger a free Storm skill of the same category. In addition, casting a Storm skill has a 30% chance to trigger a free Earth skill of the same category. This means every time we activate Storm Strike, there's a chance we can summon Earth Strike. Every time we activate Landslide, there's a chance to activate Lightning Storm or even Tornado. And when you activate your ultimate skill, for example, Petrify, there's a 30% chance to activate Cataclysm as well. For the Spirit Boons, I chose the Deer for Spirit Bonding, which means I can activate 2 of these Deer Boons. The first one I have activated is Gift of the Stag, gain 10 maximum spirit, and I also have Wariness, take 10% reduced damage from elites. Next, for the Eagle Spirit, I'm using Avion Wrath, gain 30% extra critical strike damage, which works amazing on this build. For the Wolf Spirit, I have Calamity, extend the duration of ultimate skills by 25%, and for the Snake Spirit, I'm using Obsidian Slam. Every 20th kill will cause your next Earth skill to overpower. And for those of you that don't know what overpowering means, overpowering deals bonus damage based on the sum of your current life and fortified life. Lastly, let's take a look at some aspects that you should look out for to make your Druid Landslide build even stronger. I'll also put some links to each aspect in the description below so you know exactly where to find each one. For the helmet, I have the aspect of Might. This aspect is grayed out for now since I also have it on my amulet, but I'm in the process of leveling anyways, so bear with me, this will be updated soon. With this aspect, basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for 2 seconds. You're going to be constantly using your basic skill to generate spirit, and this is an effortless way to increase survivability. For the chest armor, I have the aspect of Disobedience, gain 0.25% increase armor for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage, stacking up to 15%. For the gloves, I have the aspect of Retaliation. Core skills deal up to 34% increased damage based on your amount of Fortify. Now, if you remember from the skill tree breakdown earlier, you'll know that there's several ways to fortify yourself on this build, and with this aspect selected, you increase your damage and survivability simultaneously. For the pants, I'm using the aspect of the Protector. Damaging an elite grants you a barrier absorbing up to 983 damage for 10 seconds. This effect can only happen once every 30 seconds. For the boots, I'm using a Season 1 exclusive aspect called the Aspect of Audacity. When there are at least 5 close enemies, stun them for 4 seconds. This can only occur once every 20 seconds. This aspect works amazing on this build because it helps generate terramotes with Landslide, thanks to the stun effect, and you can also stack massive amounts of damage. For my two-handed axe, I'm using the aspect of the Trampled Earth. Trample now summons 6 landslide pillars of earth during its duration that deal 158% normal damage. Trample is now also a nature magic and earth skill. This aspect turns your werebear trample skill into a crowd control monster. Now ideally for the amulet, you would want to include the Crash Stone aspect, which increases your critical hit damage by a certain percentage against crowd control enemies when you use earth skills. For now, I'm stuck with this amulet until I find a better one. For the first ring, I'm using the aspect of Natural Balance. Casting a Storm skill grants your Earth skills 45% critical strike damage for 4 seconds. Casting an Earth skill increases the critical strike chance of Storm skills by 12%. This aspect is perfect for any Druid build that's using Nature's Fury as the key passive, since Earth skills and Storm skills are constantly being rotated. And for the second ring, I'm using the aspect of the Aftershock. Landslide's Earth Pillars each strike a second time and deal an additional 11% bonus damage per hit. So your core skill now deals twice the amount of damage with an additional 11% damage bonus. By now, you can just see how strong this build is, and I can't imagine how powerful it's going to be once I make my way into World Tier 4 and Endgame. I'm planning on dropping several updated versions of this build very soon, so if you don't want to miss them, I highly recommend subscribing to the channel. If you enjoyed this video, a like would be very much appreciated, and don't forget to turn on those bell notifications so you are notified every time I drop a new video. Take care, everyone.